Hey everybody, welcome in. This is Jordan Bradford here with Jeff Beck, and you're listening to Just Ballin with JB. Join us each week, and don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review to your favorite sports talk show. And hear our thoughts on what's going on in the world of the NFL, college football. We'll talk a little basketball when the NBA season starts rolling around. Might even get into a little college basketball and golf when the time comes, too. But for right now, we're in football season, and we're going to be talking some NFL and college football today. Jeff, what do we got on the docket right away?
Yeah, let's jump right in. We got a few, just a couple one biters, just going to touch on real quick. Nothing too in depth, but yeah, kicking off NFL first. Are the Panthers the worst team of all time? We're not sure. We're not sure. It's early. They definitely do suck, but yeah, we'll have to see if they're the worst team of all time. Bryce is benched and bringing in the near 40 Red Rocket to come and be their savior. So let's see what he can do. Andy Dalton coming in. Let's see what the Panthers can do.
Yeah, change is coming in Carolina. Let's switch a little bit to college here. So I got a one biter for you. And this one biter might take 3 or 4 bites, but
There, a couple bites.
we've got some teams to watch. So if you're tuning into college football this year and maybe you've stepped away from it for a little while, or you just haven't had the opportunity to follow every team because there are so many of them, I'm going to give you 4 teams that I think you should be paying attention to, and there's a common thread. First team I would pay attention to is University of Tennessee, the Volunteers. Their quarterback, Nico Iamaleava, I think that's how you pronounce his last name. It's pretty tricky. You'll see it or you'll feel what I'm saying when you see his name. But I just call him Nico. Nico's a redshirt freshman QB, and he's the next like Johnny Manziel type quarterback. Tune into a Tennessee game if you get the opportunity to. It's well worth the watch. The dude is awesome, and he's just worth the price of admission. So you got Tennessee, then you got Nebraska, which is normally not a team that I'd pay a whole lot of attention to. Certainly not since the knees, and I was a little young then. But they got a quarterback by the name of Dylan Raiola who looks an awful lot like Patrick Mahomes, but I don't know if he is doing it intentionally or not. He claims it's all unintentional.
Apparently, he has no idea that he looks like him.
Apparently, and I've heard some rumors that he didn't even wear number 15 because of Pat Mahomes, but I don't know if I believe any of that, but it's still worth watching him because he not only looks a lot like Patrick Mahomes, he kind of plays a similar style, so a lot of fun to watch. And then I would, of course, would be watching Alabama. They got Jalen Milroe. I think he's one of the most exciting electric QBs in college football. They're going to be awesome. I was right. Bama did crush Wisconsin last weekend. Same old Bama. And I think that Jalen Milroe is just an awesome dude to watch. He's super electric. Probably going to be, your Heisman favorite, at least early in the season. So definitely worth the watch. And lastly, last team I'll tell you to watch is Texas. They're back. And we had an Arch Manning sighting, which is pretty cool. And it makes me feel a little old. I'm sure, Jeff, you feel similarly, but growing up watching Peyton Manning and Eli Manning, and both of those guys are no longer in the league, but their nephew is now playing big time college football for the University of Texas. And another guy that Peyton Manning used to throw the ball around to, Marvin Harrison, his son's playing in the NFL. And
Yeah.
so I feel old having watched those dudes' dads playing, for majority of their careers, and now watching their kids play. That's one of those things that just kind of makes you feel older than you are.
Yeah, starts to happen quickly. The kids
Yeah,
start coming up, and you're all of a sudden one of the old ones. But
that's right.
is
That's
what
right.
it is.
Big
Uh,
one biter there for you.
yeah, the four biter. Back to NFL quickly. True one biter. Do the Jags have a Trevor Lawrence problem, or does Trevor Lawrence have a Jags problem? Not quite sure yet. Season's early. We still got to see a little bit more from him. But Trevor Lawrence did say we suck right now. So, things are not looking great there. We got to see some improvement, or this is going to be a throwaway season for him. So they got to figure some stuff out quickly.
At least he's being honest. Back to college again. I promise I won't be only talking college football today. These one biters are going to be real quick, or this one biter here. Games to watch in college this weekend. So there's going to be a lot of great NFL games on Sunday, Monday, but two games that I would definitely encourage you to watch. And it just so happens I'm here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but both of the games are taking place in the state of Oklahoma. We got OU Tennessee. OU is playing their first SEC football game, and they're hosting the number seven or six ranked Tennessee Volunteers, and that is going to be quite the welcome to the
Good challenge.
SEC.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that game's on. I believe that's College Game Day, and it's going to be the late night game. So definitely tune into that one if you're looking to watch some good SEC football and see if OU can hang. And then earlier in the day, actually, Oklahoma State's going to play Utah. And that one's interesting because, the winner of that's probably going to go on and win the Big 12, get a playoff berth. And the loser might not even make the playoffs. So, this is a big game. I don't know that the Big 12 is going to get a lot of teams in, not with the SEC and Big 10 as good as they are. So those are the games to watch: OU Tennessee and OSU Utah.
Exciting weekend out in Oklahoma there. You got a lot to be excited about.
That's right. It's like the Big Apple down here,
Super close to that.
All right. Well, let's get into the meat here. We had a couple of appetizers, a couple of one-biters, and hope you got some room left on your plate because
Let's go.
I think we're talking. Let's get right into Bears Texans. I think that's the best place to start here. Sunday Night Football. Jeff, what do you think of the game? Anything you took away from it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a lot to take away. As a Bears fan or rooting for the city of Chicago. Unfortunate loss. In a few ways. I think we were expecting a lot better showing from Caleb as a whole. Don't think it really felt that. Maybe he doubled his yards that he threw for, but that obviously didn't really show in that regard. Defense still looking very solid. I think that's obviously right now what we're hanging our hat on is a really, really strong defense against a team that I think a lot of people are saying, has a quarterback in Stroud, top 5 quarterback probably at this point based on what we've seen this season, what we saw at the end of last year. Again, we talked about the receiving core last week on the pod. So yeah, I think, the defense, holding the Texans to under 20 points is significant. But the offense, yeah, just to see the O-line struggling as much as it did, to see Caleb struggling as much as he did. I thought there were definitely some flashes that were better than what we saw in week 1, which was good. More mistakes in the interceptions, of course, right? That always looks bad. Week 1, you could kind of hang your hat on no turnovers. Were more of that, but I also thought you saw some signs, some improvement from him a little bit as well. But the O-line is clearly still struggling a little bit. He's still struggling a bit, right? Just getting used to the speed of the NFL, the strength of some of these players, getting used to some of that. But I'd say probably the biggest thing for me that I saw across the NFL, but definitely in this game, is really the play calling. We talked about it a little bit. And I just, I'm no expert in that field, but watching these, it just don't feel like the play calling is setting their teams up for success. Seeing a lot of long third downs that they're having to deal with. That's just a lot of that. That's tough for any quarterback, let alone a rookie on his second week trying to solve that. So yeah, definitely those are kind of the top things: play calling, O-line needing some work, and again, of course, Caleb's got clearly some work to do, some acclimating to the NFL. But there were some good signs. The defense is still strong, and I think he's progressing. Again, the 2 interception doesn't look great, but progressing.
Yeah, I agree with you on the Bears side of things there. I think that there's a lot to take away from that game, even offensively, that they can work on. Obviously, the glaring problem with the offense at the moment is the offensive line. And I've seen a lot of takes out there recently about the Bears didn't address the offensive line and they just added weapons and maybe Poles doesn't really know what he's doing. And I think of it from a different perspective because last year, the Bears offensive line actually was ranked in the top half of the NFL, and they didn't lose anybody. And they did add a new center, so that that obviously changes things up a little bit. You're seeing some problems in Philly. Obviously they lost a Hall of Fame center, little different than just losing the guy. But there's been a little bit of, updates on the offensive line, and I think that there's clearly been some regression because the Bears are the only team in the NFL averaging less than 3 yards per play. So I look at Caleb Williams and I'm thinking, I don't think that's all on him. Obviously, game one, I don't think he played his best. He would admit that. But at the end of the day, like you said, no turnovers. And that's really what you have to do in the NFL. When you're not playing well, you got to figure out, how do I grind out a win? And giving the ball to the other team is not a way to do that. They saw that in this week 2 game against the Texans, is that NFL, every team's going to be tough. And if you're giving the ball away, it's going to be tough for your defense to overcome that, even if the Bears defense is as good as it is, which I think they're fantastic. I actually think the real story from that game is CJ Stroud already the second best quarterback in the NFL? I mean, I have never seen anybody just come into the NFL and just be as like cerebral as he is. When he's got 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10, 3rd and 11, it just feels like he's probably going to pick this up. And the Bears are have been in nothing but 3rd and 11s, and it feels like they're not going to pick up any of them all year long. So It is a big difference. Obviously, he's got a little better offensive line play right now. But I just love watching him play. He fits passes into tight spots, throws a great spiral, just like one of the most accurate passers I've seen, and just feels like he's 5 years into the league, not a year and 2 games.
Absolutely. I think it's, this early game, it's just so tough because we have these thoughts in our head of what a team's going to be, what a player's going to be. And then when you don't see that right away, is that mean it's the complete opposite? Does it mean it just they're having, the Bengals are always a great example. It's like 0-2 year after year after year, and then they do what they might do. So I think it's really hard to, make these. That's why there is so many kind of overreactions and underreactions to it. But I think we saw enough from Stroud last year. I think we've seen enough from this Bears defense from last year as well to hold them under 20, but still do what they did. I think it's kind of one of those. There's quite a few things I looked at that was you could take a positive look or the negative look depending how you want to, right? And I think with Stroud against that great defense, you put up less than 20, but again, he was in those important spots, those long third downs, whether it was kind of off script or just right on script. He's executing those plays when they need to, right? We've seen it with Mahomes time and time again. Things might be ugly, but they figure out a way to do that. I definitely think he is the real deal. I think, like you said, whether it's number 2, number 3, I think he's somewhere up there, absolutely. And just going back to Caleb, kind of as that comparison, I feel like those two were kind of comparisons just because Stroud rookie last year, Caleb rookie this year, and then they both kind of get that comparison to Mahomes a little bit. We've talked a little bit briefly, the touchdown passes through the first few weeks of the season is just down incredibly. So I was looking at it in 2019, it was at 105, the next year 110, 110, 105. Last year was only 86 touchdown passes thrown in the first 2 weeks. This year it's down to 69. So it's one of those situations where clearly it's across the board, right? So you could look at that as a positive, like everybody's throwing less touchdowns right now. But then also Caleb has 0, so it's still the bottom of the bottom, right? So there's kind of a positive and a negative to it. But I like the fact that I think, to your point, in the week 1, he was saying, okay, just don't turn the ball over, and we can get this win. We saw what Will Levis did. He's saying just don't turn it over. We can get this win with the defense. I liked in week 2 that he was trying to make some plays, right? He was doing a little bit of that scrambling that one. His jersey's getting ripped off. I like that he's trying to get to that. I think he just needs a little bit more time to understand how fast these DBs are, how quickly they can cover on a receiver when he looks open and then he's not open. So I liked him trying to be a little bit more aggressive. It resulted in more turnovers. Ended up being a loss, but I think the Texans are going to be a really good team to lose by less than a touchdown or a touchdown. I think there's definitely some positives to come from it, but they gotta get some things going on offense to keep the fan base ready to roll and excited for the games. That's for sure.
Yeah. I'm confident they'll get it together, but the pressure is cooking there because Eberflus is a defensive coach. Waldron is a brand new OC, and I don't see the Bears bringing everybody back on the coaching staff if there's a disappointing, year this year. So I know Caleb's a rookie. Obviously, he's trying to figure out the NFL, figure out what can I do, what can I not do, how do I have to get to my spots. So it's going to take him a little bit of time, and thankfully this defense is great, and hopefully it'll be able to carry them, deep into the season. And then I think that by then there'll be enough reps for Caleb in the offense, and hopefully Shane will get the offensive game plan a little better, maybe make it a little easier on the offensive line, not have to block as long. So yeah, great. It was a great Bears Texans game. So enjoyed watching it. Would have liked to have a win, but you're not going to win them all, and you gotta learn from your losses here. All right.
What we got?
Up next, let's talk a little bit of Tua. So a little change of gears here, and some news today on the Tua front that came out. And I know that this story is a little old because it's from the Thursday night game, which is almost a week ago. But I think with the news that came out today, I think it's worthwhile just kind of having a conversation about, what's his future look like in the NFL, and what's he to do here now?
Yeah, it's obviously, I mean, first thoughts are just, super sad that he's got to deal with this stuff as often as he had. You see guys who long careers, especially at the quarterback position, never deal with this kind of stuff. So yeah, it's unfortunate that he has to deal with it, but that is the nature of the game. And sometimes, we've seen it plenty of times, time and time again, where injuries happen and kind of derail a player's career. And so, it is part of the game. Unfortunate that he's having to deal with it. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've seen a lot of talk about, I think we mentioned Mike McDaniels, says we shouldn't be talking about his career at this point. But yeah, I was watching the game with some buddies when it happened on Thursday night. And, that was the first thought when you saw it. You saw him go down. You kind of saw his arm go up. That was the first thought was, is he going to be done? Is the career over with that many significant concussions, right? There's different grades, different levels to these concussions. A grade 1 is not all that significant. Anything with the brain is always scary, but not that significant. But you start seeing these 2, 3, 4 grade. I mean, they're significant. You have a few of those in a couple of years. It's something to talk about. He's mentioned retirement back. Obviously, last year was a clean year for him, so that worked out. But the year prior, he talked about retiring. So, I mean, it's definitely on people's minds. What's he going to do? Is he going to get cleared? Is the NFL going to shut him down? Are they going to want that liability? Is he going to have to make the decision himself? I think at the end of the day, obviously I want him to do what he feels comfortable doing. If they clear him to play and he's able to do it and wants to go, I think that'd be awesome. Being on the IR, he's going to be out at least 4 weeks, it sounds like. So
Yeah, 4
week
weeks
6,
minimum.
week 7, yeah, that'll be the earliest he can come back. Will he come back then? I think everybody's waiting to kind of hear a statement from him. But yeah, I mean, even then the counter to that is, yeah, what's Miami going to do in the short term? I think we talked about his backup, and obviously that's not somebody to get super excited about, unfortunately.
It's going to be tough to win a lot of games with Skylar Thompson.
Yeah.
I think they also just brought in Tyler Huntley, who used to be, if I remember correctly, the backup to Lamar in Baltimore.
Yeah, I think he was there. Yeah, that sounds right.
At
So
least
we'll
they
see.
might have someone that's potentially serviceable. And actually, I heard on Nick Wright's show this morning, he mentioned the possibility, he wasn't, breaking any news or anything, just more of like a speculative idea would be, maybe Bryce Young to Miami here. I don't know if it's going to work or not, because I don't know if Bryce Young can play in the NFL, but they clearly are. I think the Panthers are clearly done with him. And the Dolphins, if any coach can maybe get something out of him, a Mike McDaniels type coach is the guy, right? Someone who's kind of that Shanahan mold, those really, really great play callers to help utilize like what his strengths are and what his weaknesses are.
Yeah.
So maybe that's an option for Miami right now, but I really feel for Tua. This is a tough spot to be in. I think that what makes concussions such a hard injury for us to like wrap our heads around, no pun intended, is that with if you blow out your knee, right, and you can no longer run fast or make cuts and get open, you just kind of know I'm done. I physically can't get there anymore. But it's got to be a different experience if you get a concussion And, the doctors are like, dude, you can't keep playing. If you get another concussion, your life's gonna be ruined 20 years from now. But by the way, a week from now, 2 weeks from now, you're gonna be totally normal. And everything's gonna
You'll
be fine. You're
feel
gonna be able
good
to
to
do
go.
everything that you could do before the
Yeah.
concussion.
Yeah.
And that's got to be really difficult to make a decision based on just the future, knowing that today I'm good. Like he could probably get back out there in a couple weeks and be throwing touchdowns and looking just like the same old Tua. I mean, last year he had a pretty decent year.
Yeah.
Was able to play the whole year. So I think that's got to be a really interesting dynamic that's going on with him right now. Is just how do you do
Yeah.
that?
I'm sure he's thinking through it himself personally, right? Just, his feelings. I mean, people have been talking all about it, but you work that hard. We talked about it kind of last week about being a career backup or Kirk getting
Yeah.
benched and doing that. And when you're just that ultra competitor, you work that hard to get to where you got to. That's got to be really, really tough to make that decision. So I'm sure he's going to at least have some time if he's on the IR. I don't know if that's necessary or if that was kind of just a good way to give him some time to ponder and go through it. But yeah, hopefully he'll have some time and he'll have the opportunity to make a decision himself. I think that would be the best case scenario, that there's nothing health wise that he cannot do it, that he's not clear, that he can at least make the decision and decide for himself. But either way, I mean, they got 4 weeks at least coming up here now, and he's going to be out. Mostert's been out. Jeff Wilson's been banged up a little bit. So they got some injuries. They like to kind of do the running back by committee. And I would guess Tyreek Hill, just how fast he is, the way he plays, that's probably not just a drop any quarterback in and you're going to be right on it. So whether they bring in another backup, whether they did a Bryce Young, something like that, I mean, they're going to have a few weeks here in a row that's going to be tough. And then even if Tua does come back, wants to come back, can play in 4 weeks, that's probably going to be a little bit of getting back acclimated, getting back to the speed of the game. So a lot of people, I think, had Miami to win that division. I know that was probably one of the bigger toss-ups with the Bills, the Jets. I think the Patriots are the only ones that weren't really factored in, although, started off a little better than most people expected. But either way, I mean, yeah, that's going to be, they're going to have to figure some things out pretty quickly. Maybe have to rely on the run game a little bit more than even they'd want to, just to see what they can do over the next few weeks, and then still waiting here from Tua.
Yeah, and another thing that's a uniqueness is, Tua signed that big contract in the offseason that, I, for one, I don't think I would have given him the contract. Obviously, that I don't feel great saying that now because I want that guy to get paid. I mean, he just got his brain smashed in. So I do want these guys to make their money. I don't think I would, be able to justify giving him that kind of money for basically this exact reason, right? Is that, it's just like any other type of injury. He's got an injury history. If you give a guy who's got a torn ACL, a big contract as a running back, you are rolling the dice that, maybe he doesn't get back to form. And what I wanted to talk about with his contract, though, was I read that in his contract, if the doctors were to declare him medically, like basically if the NFL says we are retiring you due to a medical issue, he's going to get to keep the vast majority of the big contract he just signed. But if he retires on his own, he's going to forfeit most of it.
So the big question with that, then, I mean, I think that's awesome for Tua to be able to keep his money, and that's kind of why these players want to lock in deals, why Jamar Chase wants to get his deal and is now buying a life insurance for $50 million because of those types of situations. So I think that's great for them. They're putting their health on the line every game. How does that then affect Miami's cap moving forward? Would that be something that hits them, or does that get wiped away cleanly because the NFL is forcing the retirement? Do you know?
Yeah, so I don't know for sure. My assumption is that those types of incidents where they have a player who gets an injury of some sort and they're under contract and their salaries against the cap, right? My guess would be is that they would remove it from the cap because in theory, right? I mean, what if a team had, 5 guys get injured, they can't play? and they literally are going to be forced to be retired, but they might have a contract for the following season, and now you have no room to do anything. You can't cut an injured player.
Be a lot of players to go out,
Yeah, it would probably be a lot, but
forcefully retired. But I get your point. Like
I
that would
think,
it
yeah, I
would
think
seem
there's a
unfair.
clause that
Yeah,
they still get paid, and what my assumption would be too is that the NFL or maybe even teams specifically might have insurance contracts in place
that's probably
that
true too.
protect them in the event that, like, okay, we have to now pay out a contract for a player that got injured and we're on the hook for paying them. Now, I would guess that, like with most insurance, it's probably not covering the whole thing. So there might be a little bit that the Miami Dolphins owner has to shell out. But
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, it's a tough situation for him. I think I would say, whatever he wants to do, I think people should support. And if he wants to retire, I think that I would, as a football fan, that's a bummer
yeah,
that a decent player being forced to retire for an injury at a young age. But if he wants to keep playing, I think everybody should respect that decision and be like, you know what, it'd be very difficult for anybody to walk away from their dream
yeah,
life,
yeah, yeah.
especially if they know that they can do it.
Exactly. Yeah, I hope he gets to have a decision. I hope people aren't on top of him one way or the other. Whatever he decides, let him make his decision. That's best for him. And yeah, and hopefully Miami in the meantime can keep him afloat. If he does get back, they'll still have a chance, to make a run in a tough division. But yeah, best of the two. I hope he gets better soon, and we'll see how that plays out for Miami.
Yeah. All right, let's change gears a little bit. Let's talk 2-0 teams in the NFL. There's a few surprise 2-0 teams. There's some teams that I think we all kind of knew would get there in the first couple weeks. You got your Chiefs. Obviously, I think people are expecting them to have a pretty spectacular season. And a handful of others that are decent. But there's a couple that are, I would say, pretty big surprises. I'll list them out here, and then my question for you is, who do you think the biggest contender is for the Super Bowl? And the four teams that I've got here are the Tampa Bay Bucks, the New Orleans Saints, the Minnesota Vikings, and the LA Chargers, who, I think to some may not be a big surprise, but, new coach, gutted the offense, tough division, tougher conference, a lot of people think, and still managed to be 2-0. So, what do you
They've
think?
ended up
Who's the biggest
being
contender?
pretty underwhelming the last couple of years when we've expected stuff. So I think that's kind of why they fall under that. But yeah, I saw today, I think, too, out of the 2-0 teams, if you start 2-0, you have like basically a 2/3 chance, like 66.7% chance of making the playoffs. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, obviously, there's probably always your outliers that don't make it and the ones that are just locks to make it. But yeah, if you think about that, I mean, there's quite a few teams on here that you'd say, okay, 2 out of 3 are making. We got 4 on there. So, I mean, 2.5 of these teams are getting in, to the playoffs. And I don't think most people had, at least 3 of them in the playoffs probably. So that's interesting. But I would say for me, I think I'm going with the Saints is the one that I would say I think is the biggest contender, has the biggest chance of making it to the Super Bowl of those 4. I think that defense is really good. They just, they're one of those teams that seem to have a very consistent, very good defense year in, year out. They've had some pretty inconsistent quarterback play, to say the least, after Drew Brees left. And the defense has kind of been the one thing. Again, we talked last year, a weird team, winning weird games you wouldn't think they'd win, losing weird games. And I think the defense is typically what's keeping them in those games and winning some of those games. So I like that. I am no Derek Carr fan. I don't dislike the guy, obviously, but he's a proven quarterback. He has proven to be a solid, respectable quarterback. I jotted down Kirk Cousins, just that same type of quarterback. They're never in your top 5, but they're not usually in the bottom 10. They're somewhere in that sweet spot, and they have experience, right? You're not dealing with a rookie quarterback trying to figure out, what are they doing? So I like that for them in particular. That's kind of why I'm high on them. If I look at the other teams as a comparison, I do like Tampa. Baker has been one of those guys that seems to get a lot of hype, then people shut it down. And I do like the team. I like what I've seen from him. Definitely, a fan rooting for him to do well. I think that defense is pretty solid, but just a little too much hype around it that I feel like I can't go that route. The Vikings, yeah, I don't know. I don't think Sam Darnold's going to be the savior to do it. He's looked pretty solid the first couple weeks. Obviously, a nice win with the 49ers, but I look at the 49ers. They've kind of proven without some of their key players in play, they're susceptible to losing. So great win. A lot of credit for that. I don't know if they'll be able to keep that up. Tough division as well. Obviously, the Lions are supposed to be a solid team. Packers, Love's out for a little bit. Bears, we think, are good. Caleb's got to get things going, but I think that's a tough division. And the Chargers, I do like them. Like you said, probably the least surprising of that group. Wouldn't shock me, if they can make the playoffs, win a game maybe. But I feel like that's kind of the easy route to go. You got Harbaugh. We're loving what he's up to. Herbert's been one of those guys that slides through as like borderline top 5 quarterback, even though he's never really won a whole lot. We kind of give him always an out to things, and whether I think that's fair or not, I don't know. I do think he's good. I think he's talented, but yeah, just interesting how we judge different quarterbacks, and he seems to be one that is never getting the wins, but we all respect the talent and do kind of 100% all blame other aspects of the team as to why it's not working, which again, not mad about, but yeah, so I'm gonna go with the Saints would be my pick as a top contender.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good pick. I was down on the Saints. I didn't think that they were, I thought they were the same old Saints. And honestly, after the Panthers got pounded again by the Chargers in week 2, I figured, oh, great. Like the Saints are probably going to get crushed in this game now because they looked good in week 1 because the Panthers are so bad. And it just turns out that that's what happens when a really good team plays a really bad team is it's embarrassing for the bad team. And the Saints definitely look the part. I like that they finally seem to have a little bit of like swagger on offense. I feel like, even in the later years of Drew Brees' time there, it felt like a lot of like swagger on the team really came from the defense. And the offense was kind of like, dinking and dunking and just trying to like, score points in really creative ways. And now all of a sudden they're back to like running like, some power runs, some explosive plays. I mean, Derek Carr he's looked like a much better quarterback than his career. And he's a decent quarterback, I think last year was a pretty bad year for him.
Yeah.
But, new city, new system. He'd been in, Oakland, wherever, Las Vegas. He was on the Raiders for his whole career. I don't think he's the type of guy that really wanted to switch teams anyway. I think it just kind of got to that point.
He definitely did not want to, and that probably played a little bit bigger role than any of us would realize because we see the business side of it, but you don't understand the personal side of things. I bet that was a pretty tough training when he clearly thought he was going to spend his whole career there and then had to transfer cities. I bet that took a little bit more of a mental toll on him in that year than most of us could really process and realize,
Yeah, and honestly, I'm surprised that doesn't happen more often, or that isn't a bigger deal that ends up being talked about. Obviously, all these guys know that's part of the job, right? Is that you might get cut, you might get traded, you probably will get cut and traded. Most players are going to get cut and or traded at some point in their career multiple times. So for a lot of these guys, I do think that like maybe they are just more like accustomed to it. But I mean, I can't really imagine just like, showing up at the office on Tuesday and it's like, hey, by the way, you now live in New Orleans, buddy. Like you live in New Orleans, you're working at a new place, your kids are going to new schools, like everything's changing. And that's gotta be a pretty tough thing to just like wrap your head around and then be immediately like engaged. And even if you have a lead time, like if you don't want to move and you have to, that can't be like super exciting. Even in the NBA, we saw it kind of happen to Damian Lillard, his first season with the Bucks. It came out that, he's obviously going through a divorce. His kids are back in Portland. They're not there with him. And, it clearly took a toll on him. And he clearly was not super focused for a lot of the season. And after the season, he basically came out and admitted to that. He's like, look, I had a lot of shit going on in my life. And here I am now being moved to Milwaukee. I think he probably in the back of his head thought he was going to Miami, which is a very different vibe too.
Yeah.
But either way, like you're still moving cities. You're pretty much moving across the country at that point too, whether it's Milwaukee or
we get
Miami.
into it with college a decent amount because we always refer to them as kids, even though they're, I think, almost always over 18, but at least right around that age. But, it's a little easier to think like, oh, if your girl just broke up with you or she's sleeping with someone else on the team and I got to go to math class, I got this. And, there's a lot of things and we can kind of be like, oh, that actually, we forget about that. But then we're like, oh, that does make sense how they could come out and just lay an egg on the field or something. But then we seem to forget as people become adults, like, well, you're getting paid millions, so like figure it out. And it's like, well, that's all fair, but we're still human beings. People still have emotions. They still have these different things. And like, again, looking at like the quarterbacks, on Netflix, I kind of seeing that behind the scenes stuff. Like Derek Carr comes off a guy that like that might hurt a little bit more emotionally. Like he felt like they were going to be loyal to him forever, like he was playing well enough to stay. I wouldn't be shocked if that took a toll. And now maybe he's almost on the opposite end, like revenge tour. Like, let's go, let's make some stuff happen. Kamara looks as good as his rookie season, which is awesome. We talked a little bit last week on the receivers, are actually fairly, sought after, kind of looked at receivers. And just because they didn't have a quarterback, they weren't getting the same kind of, press and publicity towards it. But yeah, I think they have a pretty solid team and we'll see what they can do. I mean, obviously, I think to truly think like Super Bowl contender for any four of the teams is obviously a bit of a stretch at this moment, but it's early, and yeah, who knows what any of these teams could go on a run for. But
yeah, I mean, honestly, I like the Saints and the Bucks because of the division. And
yeah, I was gonna say, you like the Bucks, yeah.
I think that, I mean, obviously, I know the Panthers are the worst team in the NFL. Maybe Andy Dalton will be marginally better than Bryce Young, but I don't think that's just a Bryce Young problem. I think that organization, top to bottom, is a complete mess. And it shows on the field. It shows in the stands. Their fans are like, they hate the team. They hate the fact that this is what their team is. But so you got the worst team in the league in your division. So that's obviously going to give you a bit of an advantage for both teams. But they have to play each other, so that's tough.
They play each other, and ATL, which we'll get into a little bit later, or at least I will for sure. I think both will at different points.
Yeah.
I mean, so now all of a sudden you go from like, I think that division was considered the weakest for quite some time here the last few years. And now all of a sudden we're looking at, okay, we got two 2-0 teams in there. You got Atlanta, who's 1-1. And again, coming into the year, which again, we'll touch on a little bit later, but it was pretty, people were thinking pretty highly of them. So yeah, all of a sudden, other than the Panthers, you just drop them off the bottom and just say, okay, we got three decent teams. Yeah, that division actually could be kind of a fun battle, possibly, depending on how the season goes. But off to a good start for them, that's for sure.
Yeah, it'd be a pretty wild 2024 NFL season if the division that everyone thought was the worst division in the NFL ends up producing the Super Bowl winner, or even just the team that makes the Super Bowl. That'd be a pretty big glow up for the NFC South.
Absolutely. Yeah, could be fun. Could be fun, though. I'm curious to see how they do.
All right, well, we're going to take a quick break. That's part one. We'll be right back with part two, and you won't want to miss it, so stay tuned. Welcome back to Just Ballin with JB, where we got part two here, and we're going to talk a little bit of fantasy football, do a quick update for those of our listeners and viewers who saw last week. I was a big loser in the league and had to shotgun a beer, so I did it on the podcast episode. And I'm not gonna say I was great at it. Hopefully, I don't get a lot more practice this year. But big turnaround for my team. We won, so my team was able to pull out a victory, which was big for us. We're still struggling with the same issues, though. Not scoring enough points. We only won by 1.56 points this week, which was almost not enough, especially because I had Jalen Hurts, but I was going up against Drake London on Monday night. So that touchdown at the end almost cost me and the Eagles a big victory. Fortunately for me, just the Eagles got caught with the bag.
Yeah, that's unfortunate for them. I didn't care for that ending personally. But no, yeah, JB goes 2-0 for the week. Multi meaning you and I both won our games. I go 2-0 for the season there. So I mean, I was playing my cousin who sucks at fantasy football, so it wasn't all that exciting, but still pulled it out. I need Anthony Richardson to be a little more consistent. I was wanting to get into him because of the upside that is clearly there when he's on. Yeah, prefer a little more steady of a ride from him. Got to get AJ Brown back. That'll have to come up later as well too. But the Eagles lose in that fashion, and no AJ Brown. Not only their best receiver, but absolutely top 5 receiver, top 3 receiver in the league. I mean, numbers
He's
wise
pretty
for
solid.
sure. Yeah, he's there. So love to get him back, get a few more wins with a little more comfort. But yeah, overall, good week for us in fantasy. So love to see that. What else we
That's
got
right.
going on?
That's right. Yeah, so let's kick off. We got a couple of stories we want to share with the audience here. My story, well, first off, we need to do a little recapping of what happened last week. So last week we both had some overreaction stories. I'll get into mine at the moment here because it wasn't the best, or it may not be the best looking at the moment, right? So
Yeah, we'll see.
after week one, I made the overreaction statement that I feel is actually not an overreaction, but the appropriate reaction was that Michael Penix was going to be the starting quarterback for the Falcons by the end of week 4. I still feel that way. I still feel like there's a good chance of that. I know the Falcons just got a big win, but I wouldn't say Kirk Cousins looked great. I would say that, the Phillies secondary didn't play the best down the stretch. There was a lot of soft coverage, just leaving guys just with too much space. And, don't want to take anything away from Kirk. He had a good bounce back game. But you can tell watching that Falcons offense, watching Bijan Robinson run around and that receiving core that they've got, that what they're missing is a dynamic playmaker at QB. And I think that, it would have been nice to see the Falcons take another L because that would put some more heat on Kirk Cousins. And I was rooting for the Eagles anyway in that game, but I do think that I think it's still coming.
Yeah, I
And
think
even if
I
it
mean
doesn't
for
look that
you,
way.
you're definitely banking on the fact that on-field play, is hurting them enough that they'll have to make that switch. Basically, losses, right? I mean, that you're assuming that loss would help you. A couple losses that you think you can win or you'd like to win, that would force them in. I mean, there's a chance where even something like that, kind of, I don't want to say winning ugly totally. It was definitely a good win for them, but one where definitely Eagles fans, anyone rooting for them, thinking they could win, could easily. I mean, Saquon drops that ball. You could just say, that win wasn't a great win in all facets. Where maybe it's going to take some talk from the players. Bijan, Drakeland, like we've talked about, a lot of young playmakers on that team. Practice. If those guys are in there when Penix is getting reps, if he's looking good, maybe it takes some internal conversation just saying, hey, think this guy's ready, think this guy's got to go. We've won, but it doesn't look great. Maybe that's going to be your saving grace. Maybe it won't be the wins and losses in every game, but maybe something like that.
Yeah, I think hopefully too, maybe with Tampa Bay, New Orleans playing as well as they are, that Atlanta's going to feel a little bit more pressure too, that, every game's going to count a little bit more maybe than they even thought. And what would probably help me the most is if the Panthers have that week 4 game circled against the Falcons and can miraculously pull out a victory. I
Yeah,
wouldn't bet on it, and honestly, I probably would not expect it to happen in any game the
not
Panthers are
going to be your
playing. It's going
lock.
to be a surprise if they win any of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that would be a recipe for disaster if New Orleans and Tampa keep looking as good as they are, and Atlanta, who plays Kansas City this coming week, and that is going to be a tough matchup, of course.
Yeah.
You're playing the 2-time defending champs, so you can't favor the Falcons going into that game, even if you like maybe the spread or think that they could win. They're just not going to be favored. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that
Not
that
to
Panthers game it could be a big deal for the Falcons if they get embarrassed and lose to the Panthers and fall to 1-3, and meanwhile you got New Orleans and Tampa on rolls still.
Red
It's
Rocket
gonna
pulls one out.
Red Rocket.
Well, yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
We got week 4, end of week 4, him starting is the goal. So let's see. What do you got for underreported, underreaction, overreaction?
Yeah, so this one's a bit of a combination of a little underreported, but also I think maybe an underreaction across the NFL right now. So Jeff alluded to this actually a little bit earlier, but QB play, right? There's been some struggles across the league. So, not just individual quarterbacks, not coming up to, maybe play to their capabilities or what we think they're capable of. But if you look across the board, the last couple of years, there's been some struggles in QB play. And I do think there are a couple of reasons for that. I think one big reason could be just, some of the greatest quarterbacks of all time are retired now. So, you
Sure.
go back 5 years ago, you got Tom Brady still playing in the league. I don't know if Peyton Manning was quite in the
Might have
league
been out.
5 years ago, but, right on the other side of that 5 years, you've got Peyton Manning playing, Drew Brees, Phillip Rivers, Ben Roethlisberger, even Eli Manning, right? Eli Manning, I think, probably is only going to be a Hall of Famer because he won two very important football games against a very impressive team and the greatest quarterback of all time. But a lot of really good quarterbacks are no longer in the league. And some of the older quarterbacks, Aaron Rodgers specifically, didn't play at all last year, played 4 snaps. The year before that, you could see some struggles in Green Bay with him. I think as he's getting older. I'm not high on the Jets at all this year, and I don't think he's looked great to start the year. He hasn't looked as bad as Zach Wilson, but I mean, I don't know that many people would. And I think that that's a big factor to it. I also think something that, is affecting quarterbacks across the league too is maybe the lack of training camp, or not the lack of training camp, but the restrictions on it. And players and coaches talk about it. You don't get to hit as much anymore. If you watched Hard Knocks, I mean, they make a big deal about you only get so many actual full contact plays that you can run. And so they're talking you've got 60 plays. So we have 60 times to work on this only. Because outside of that, you're doing non-contact drills. And I think that's a big issue in the league across the league right now because the NFL has been moving towards a more offense-friendly rule environment, but
Yeah.
then the play on the field isn't able to match it. And I think I think you could see the NFL start making some tweaks to the offseason to allow for offenses to maybe spend a bit more time working together, give them a bit more, just opportunities to gel a little bit. You got to be careful, of course. You don't want to give the offense a super big advantage over the defense, but I don't know that the NFL is going to love the fact that if we look at 2021 to 2022 to 2023, or I'm sorry, 22 to 23 to 24, this year there's 69 total touchdown passes through 2 weeks, as you mentioned. The year before was 17 more, 36 more the year before that, and 41 the year before that. You go to, 36, think about 36 more touchdown passes through 2 weeks. That's more than one touchdown per game that we're losing. And there's not much that the NFL loves or NFL fans love more than watching touchdown passes. So
Well, I was
I'd
going to
say,
say, I
I
mean,
think that to me, that's a story to keep an eye on is what is the NFL going to do to kind of help maybe juice up the offensive numbers a little bit going forward. And
yeah.
I know we're just 2 weeks into the season, but even last year, the MVP race, a lot of people were talking Christian McCaffrey and Tyreek Hill. And it's been a long time since we've legitimately talked about a non-quarterback winning the NFL Most Valuable Player award.
Yeah. And honestly, I don't hate that. I mean, I love that other players get a little recognition. Like, we obviously understand the quarterback is the most valuable position to any team, regardless of how good or bad they are. Most is on their plate to succeed. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, part of what we've seen over the past few years has been to increase offensive efficiency, right? I mean, the rules, we always like to joke around about all the old heads, critiquing younger player in this kind of back and forth between eras. And, that's always the thing. Like, we used to run the ball all the time. We never even used to throw the ball, so obviously in the late 2000s and we started to see that progression. So the last 5 years, I wouldn't say we're throwing the ball way more today than we were 3 years ago necessarily, but over the last 20 years, it's
Yeah,
definitely happened. Um,
is it
these
not hard to
defensive,
believe? Is it not hard to believe years ago they only ran the football and yet they still managed to somehow score points from time to time? Like
yeah.
I can't even fathom the fact that they didn't pass the ball at the beginning of the NFL, and
No, I
now
mean
they
it's like every
do it
sport,
so
how
often.
everything evolves and how everything goes. So yeah, I mean it's a little bit shocking to see that. And again, the biggest thing is just not only that the games evolve, but then the rules have changed, right? The
Yeah,
way that players get penalized on defense for hits that look very normal to what we used to see at some point in time. So to see that big of a drop off is definitely not ideal, right? That's not what they're looking for. And I agree. I don't think it's been talked about kind of as like across the board all quarterbacks. We realize we're pinpointing certain quarterbacks who have underperformed and looked really bad, but we haven't really discussed as a whole why are all these quarterbacks not really looking that good. So I think that's a big part. I think the preseason stuff is, to your point, I'd be curious if the NFL steps in what they could do. I mean, obviously, you're overstepping your bounds a little bit, but at the end of the day, again, we know it's a business. There's a product we're putting out for the fans. Our fans are the ones creating this revenue. The TV deals aren't there. All that stuff's not there if the fans aren't there. They mandate you're starting, you submit your starting rotation right now, and they're playing at least half the game for two of the preseason, whatever it is. I mean, that obviously seems a little bit extreme. But to get off to these slow starts, I mean, yeah, these few games, like I said, I was watching a couple. I was like, man, I wouldn't mind turning this off. It's not, I mean, it's close. It's not terrible, but like, I want to see some good play back and forth. I mean, we've talked about that for years. It's why I'm not so dedicated to any one team is I would like to watch good sports. I want to see good football back and forth. Whether the team I do like more or less loses, I want to see good football back and forth. Like that's what I care about.
yeah.
Again, good teams got to win ugly here and there. Like that makes sense. But yeah, it's intriguing. I think the other thing we mentioned a little bit was it seems more now that top offensive coordinators specifically are getting head coaching jobs very quickly. Teams are incredibly quick to fire their head coach. And what they
Hmm.
want is, for many reasons, but that quarterback is enormous, right? As we've talked about, that's the huge part of your offense. Having an offensive minded head coach to pair with that person, everything's directly correlated. I think that's a pretty substantial reason as well. You're seeing offensive coordinators get hired to other places and people getting fired quickly. They're learning new offensive, new schemes all the time. That's got to be very tough to acclimate quickly and get off to these fast starts that the fans would like to see.
Yeah, and think about situations like Josh McDaniels, right? So I think that happens a lot more in the league than we realize. But you have a situation where Josh McDaniels, early in his career, offensive coordinator for the Pats, was doing a great job, got a job as a head coach, over in Denver, right? If you recall, and I think everyone thought this guy's going to be the next best coach. And look what he's doing with New England. Tom Brady is a great quarterback, but certainly no athlete. And so I think there was so much hype around him as this great play caller. He gets the head coaching job, basically screws it up completely because as it turns out, some people aren't meant to be the top dog.
Correct.
Some people
Just
they
a really
just
good offensive coordinator.
yeah, you might be the best
Great.
offensive coordinator there is, but you don't need to be running everything. Like that's may not be your best skill set, right? So he loses the job, and New England brings him back because New England historically has been a pretty smart franchise. They
Yeah.
bring him back. A lot of these teams don't do that though. Their coordinator leaves for a head coaching job, and if they get fired a couple years
I'll
later
see you later.
because they didn't cut it for whatever reason, it doesn't always have to be because you're not a great leader, like a lot of the rumors were around with Josh McDaniels at his head coaching
Yeah.
stints, but it could just be like, hey, you just didn't prove it on the field. Like your team wasn't successful enough. And now you're just taking the next job that you can get somewhere else. Maybe it's another head coaching gig. Maybe it's a coordinator somewhere else. And you're not going back to where you were successful before. And I think it's a great point just about the coaches moving around. And I wonder if at some point the NFL would consider, or an NFL team maybe. I don't think the league would do this, but what if a team came out and said, "We'll pay the offensive coordinator more than we pay our head coach." Head coach's job is to manage the entire team's roster and overall game plan, but our offensive coordinator is the person who's responsible for the offense, and we are going to pay a lot of money for that. And you get an offensive coordinator who says, you know what? This is a pretty good gig. Like, I'm running this offense. I'm only responsible for that side of the football. So if we lose a shootout 35-34, no one's going to be on me about this. I did my job really well, and I'm not taking all the heat for that. I could see that coming in the future. Ultimately, I think what that could potentially do, though, is it could force teams to be like, we're going to hire our head coach has got to be the offensive guy then.
Yeah.
Because if not, you run the risk of you can't get your guy because your guy's being paid by, the New Orleans Saints. They got this new offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak, right? I believe that's Gary Kubiak's son.
I believe, yes. Pretty sure it is.
Part of the whole like Shanahan tree of coaching, right? If I'm New Orleans and I don't want to fire Dennis Allen, I mean, you might want to, but he's off to a great start now. If you don't want to fire him, especially the way he coaches the defense, just basically pay Kubiak more than you pay Dennis Allen and make it an important position on the team, more important than the head coach in some regards.
Yeah, I don't disagree with it. I think it's an interesting take. I think you have to be really cautious with how you'd be able to do that. You'd almost have to say, this is such a specialty position and like they're almost so smart, you know what I mean? Like I can think of like a scientist, like you might not be able to communicate with everybody. You may not be able to, run a lab and teach others how you do things. But you are the smartest person in that room, right? Like you're almost incapable of conversing with other people, but like we know you're that smart. You'd have to kind of almost phrase it and put it in that way because otherwise I think head coaches' egos, it'd be a little tough to swallow that, somebody else technically below them is making more money. But I get your point. I understand the concept of it. And I think to your point too, I think coaches would probably, become that, instead of saying, hey, I'm a defense specialist, focus. I think you'll run into, I talk about all the time in life in general, I'd end on this is just like everything cycles, it's like fashion cycles, all these things you start seeing come back from when we were kids come back. Everything in this world cycles. You're seeing it was like running backs, these great running backs come in. Now it's like you could draft a running back anywhere, anytime, plug them in, and they're going to be great. Kareem Hunt's going to come back, and I guarantee he looks solid for the Chiefs after Pacheco's out. Like, he hasn't even played. No one wants him. He's nothing. I bet he comes back and looks just fine. He's not Pacheco, but he's fine. No problem. Mm-hmm. And then you get these receivers, right? All of a sudden, this market's about to blow up. And then all of a sudden, everyone's going to start being like, I want to be a receiver. That's where you make money. And then all of a sudden, that's going to become a dime a dozen. I think you'll start to see that. I wouldn't be shocked if you'll start to see a lot of coaches focusing on the offensive end so that they can be head coaches. And then eventually, whether it's 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, it's like, hey, man, defense wins championships. We got to have a defensive-minded coach to get that, right? And like, I think we'll just continue to see that cycle. But to your point right now, I think that's the move. I think you got to have a great offense. I think having an offensive head coach is what an ideal situation would be. But yeah, we'll We'll have to see what
Yeah,
they do.
I think it's a pretty good predicament that the NFL's in, that viewership is at all-time high, even though quarterback play is starting to slip a little bit the last couple years. So, I mean, clearly NFL's putting on the best product there is on television.
Yeah.
It's the perfect TV sport. They're really doing a great job. So, you know,
Yeah. True.
well,
Speaking of great TV stuff, yeah, great TV. The Steelers defense, that's just excellent TV. Beating the Broncos, what, 13-10 or whatever the heck they won by. Yeah, that's
yeah,
not always great TV, but it's great for what I mentioned last year, last pod. The underreaction. I think the Steelers, get another win. I like what I see from him so far. This week will actually be a really nice matchup for him. But I think to see what we've seen the first couple weeks, Fields is looking good. No picks, right? We've kind of talked about that. I kind of compared him to Caleb Williams in the first pod. Just he's not a rookie, but it's a new team. It kind of has that same feel. He kind of has to warm up to what they're doing, warm up to Tomlin, all that stuff. I mean, to have 0 picks, I think is awesome. That defense is, again, a defense that we expect to be good, to be hard nosed all the time. I was looking at, a few things. They've had multiple picks in each games. That's awesome. I don't think that's going to remain every single game where they're getting 2 picks per game, but having 2 picks to start, again, quarterback play they faced has not been incredible, but 2 picks a game is awesome. They were 2 for 9. The other team was 2 for 9 on third downs in the first game, 2 for 12 in the second game. So 4 for 21 on third down conversions against the defense. That's pretty good. You can win with that. Red zone, only 1 and 2 the first game, for 3 the second game. So one, they're not even getting to the red zone that often. Again, not the greatest competition to start, which is fair. But even when they're getting down there, they're doing a good job of kind of holding up and playing really well. So I like that defense. I think the recipe is purely, even when we have the ball, we are going to take as much time off as we can. We are going to run the clock down every single time. We're going to run the ball, right? Again, 2 good running backs and no turnovers. Play it safe, do what you do well, but just do not have those turnovers, and then have a great defense. I think they're going to hold the ball more than the other team will, and probably end up with less yards and probably end up with less of the spectacular stuff. But they're going to have the ball, they're going to slow it down, they're going to do that stuff. And so, yeah, I think my only fear with it is, there's still the talk of like Fields should be starting week 3. Sounds like Russell's still out. I don't want there to be that conversation. I think at some point we have to just commit to Fields at this point and say, hey, this is who we're going with. You've been out long enough, Russell, and that's the only thing in the back of my mind. If Russell's healthy in week 4, and like, yep, all right, Russell's back, it's like, then we're going to kind of throw a wrench in everything that we're working on. And I say we're, not that I'm a part of the team, but that's, how they would kind of phrase that. So that's my biggest concern is if they try and throw Russell back into it. But everything else, I mean, they're going to be ugly. They're not going to be great for TV, but that is going to be their recipe. And again, Ravens start 0-2, Bengals start 0-2, Browns 1-1. Luckily, pull out the 1-1. Like I said, I'm still feeling pretty good about a 3-1 start. Yeah, I think this Chargers thing, next game, that should be a good game. 2-0, 2-0. Little different contrast, at least historically. That should be a good game too.
Yeah, and the Chargers game's interesting to me because, I don't think this has been talked about enough, but, obviously Jim Harbaugh, new coach for the Chargers, doing a good job. I mean, they're 2-0 to start the season. He's had a lot of success everywhere he's been. I mean, he was successful at Stanford. He was successful his first stint in San Francisco. Michigan, he wins a national championship. Now he's, in LA, and they're hoping that, he's going to deliver a championship for the Chargers. And I think they have a really solid quarterback who has been underutilized by a bad coach. But I think the interesting little fun fact, and hopefully the Steelers, are aware of this, is that Jim Harbaugh has won his last 17 games as a head coach. So he's 17-0 in his last 17 games. And if you look at regular season games alone, you got to go back to 2021 to find the last time Jim Harbaugh's lost a regular season football game as a head coach.
Jeez.
2021.
That's pretty
So,
shocking.
you know, I don't know that he's going to go, 17-0 this year for the Chargers. You know, I think getting to 3-0, I think is very, very possible. I think they're playing good football. They're playing good old-fashioned Jim Harbaugh style football. They're just running it and playing good defense.
You might be one of the only people, out in the public, talking about that record, but I bet he knows that he's 17-0. And I bet he's sharing that with his brother who's 0-2 right now. And I bet this week the streak ends, that cockiness going to come to an end. Steelers get the W. The other Harbaugh gets the W as well, which might touch on that later as well. A little preview. Yeah, that's an interesting stat. I did not know that, and good for him. But like you said, it's going to come to an end at some point. Why not steel curtain, baby? Let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's jump into our next little segment here. Let's talk about games that we are watching coming up this week. What games do you have circled on the calendar for this weekend, Jeff?
There we go. I guess we're jumping right into it. I think Ravens Cowboys is going to be a top notch game. It was that mid afternoon game for us. Both teams coming off a pretty shocking loss. Ravens going down to the
true.
Raiders. A lot of talk that shouldn't even be considered an option, something that would happen, and it did. So that was pretty rough. And then again, some we'll jump into in a touch later, but Dallas big favorites and Saints just going in there or where were they at? Yeah, they were in Dallas, yeah, and just absolutely putting it on them. So I think both teams, I think Ravens and Dallas are both good enough teams to have good bounce backs. I don't look at either of those losses. I don't look at Ravens being 0-2 and think they're some terrible team. Obviously going to have a lot of work to do. We talked about how you start a season 2-0, having a 66% chance of making the playoffs. Starting 0-2, you have an 11% chance. So not great chances, for the Ravens in that simple regard, but I think most of us would agree they're a better team than that. They still, got a lot of life back. So yeah, I'm excited to see that. Cowboys are at home. That's typically when they're playing the best. Again, other than this past week, it's been pretty consistent there. Ravens, I think, can go on the road, play tough. It's a 1-point spread right now. So I think the Cowboys are +1. Ravens favored by 1 point. I think that should be a heck of a game to watch mid-afternoon on Sunday.
Yeah, that's going to be a close one. And I imagine a pretty good game for us fans. I'm going to be watching, Saturday night, I'm going to be watching OU Tennessee. In a clash of SEC teams, one, staple SEC team and one brand newcomer. And I think that's good. I think it's going to be a great game. It's basically a matchup of you've got one of the best offenses in college football in Tennessee, and so they haven't played a ton of great competition yet. Last week they played Kent State, but they won that game like 71-0.
They beat NC State, who was ranked, right, when they played them second. They spanked them pretty good. I think Tennessee
a lot of people,
really...
NC State was a early preseason pick to be an ACC contender.
That's what I mean. I think Tennessee might give them a rude awakening, like almost like take it like welcome, here's what you got to work with.
Yeah,
that's kind of my thought. I know they're the favorite, but that wouldn't shock.
So there's some other good storylines going into this game too that I think are potentially going to lead to the same outcome you just mentioned there. I'd love for OU to do great and play well, but the other thing that a lot of people casual fans may not be aware of is the head coach for Tennessee. His name is Josh Heupel. Well, Josh Heupel was a quarterback at one time for the Oklahoma Sooners. In fact, he was the quarterback in the, I believe, late 90s, early 2000s there when they won their last national championship. He was the starting quarterback. And for a little while, he was an offensive coordinator at Oklahoma. But in 2014, their head coach at the time, Bob Stoops, fired him. Fired his former quarterback, current offensive coordinator, and now Josh is head coach of Tennessee and going into OU, gonna have an opportunity to show a little
get a little get
revenge,
back, get a little
get a
get
little get
back.
back, and welcome OU to the SEC, where he's
Yeah,
been there for a couple of years. I think this game's got a recipe for Tennessee maybe really putting it on OU. The
yeah,
reason I think it could be a good game is what OU does really well right now is defense. And their offense has struggled, but they got a defensive coach. I think that's why their team may not perform as well, but their head coach is a defensive guy. So their defense is pretty solid, and it's going to be a clash of, high-powered offense, high-powered defense. And, I think it's going to go Tennessee's way, but it should be a good game. And I'm going to guess the environment's going to be pretty crazy. Those Sooner fans are going to they're going to want to also make a statement, going into the SEC.
what do they do? Boomer Sooner. I was about to say Sooner
Yeah.
Boomer. Is it Boomer
Boomer,
Sooner?
Boomer Sooner. Yep, that's right.
Yeah, there we go. Well, let's see.
So I'll
That's
be
a sweet
watching.
game.
Yeah, so I'll be watching that game, and plenty of NFL games as well
Yeah.
on Sunday and Monday and Thursday too. Might even catch a little Jets Patriots and watch two bad football teams.
Yeah, I was gonna say not overly excited about it, but I think that's a good one for the Patriots again. Like I said, they've been showing some life, and they, love to play the Jets tough. I feel like that's like a little rivalry that goes on there. Um, so yeah, I think it'll be fun. Again, maybe not highlight for TV purposes, but it should be a fun game. So yeah, looking
Yeah,
forward to some.
yeah. So before we wrap up, let's jump into some locks.
Yeah.
And
Well, let's touch on our locks from last week. How'd that go?
yeah, that was a rough one. So I had Dallas covering the spread, and they were minus 6.5, I believe, at kickoff there, and I don't know if they lost by 30 or not, but it was pretty close. And yeah, I mean I couldn't have been more wrong, honestly. I should have known better than to take the bait from Vegas on that one. But I thought same old Saints, and I think that as we talked about earlier, they're a much different football team than before. I think they've got a good offensive coordinator. They're using their players well, right? I mean, Kamara's healthy. He looks like the Alvin Kamara of like 5 years ago,
Yeah.
when he was arguably one, top 2, 3 running back in the league. So
Yeah.
if he's back to form, and Chris Olave's kind of back to where he was his rookie year, where he looked really good. And obviously, Derek Carr, he can pass the ball around. He's proven that if he's got guys to throw it to, he will find them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a tough
No,
one.
it was a
Tough
risky
one
one. I
for
think we
me.
both had our hesitations with each other's. But yeah, I had said I could see this, Dallas could come in and do that, but I'd also see New Orleans winning it outright. Didn't necessarily think they'd win by 20 something, 30, have 35 points at half. But I think that's why I think we probably both are fairly high in them as far as kind of surprising 2-0 teams as contenders. I think that offense is what's been the most shocking part. We could definitely both agree, and most people would, they had a good defense. And we kind of expect that to be their staple. But that offense, I don't care who you're playing. We'd said that week one. Like, I don't care if you're playing the Panthers, putting up 35, 40 points on anybody means you're doing something, right? These are still NFL players, NFL defenses. If you're a bad offense, you're not going to be putting up 40 points against any NFL team if you're a bad offense. So I think that, to me, especially week one, was kind of, okay, these guys have something clearly going on offense. And then, to see this follow-up on a defense, again, that, everybody loves to change stories. Hindsight's 2020. But, Dallas D was definitely being talked about as a solid defense. I think I drafted them in a couple of fantasy leagues thinking like, I'll take these guys and keep them all year long. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, their defense is terrible. So, it was a great win for Saints. Definitely a tough lock for you.
Yeah.
But hey, it happens. Gambling is gambling. What do you got for this week as far as a lock, an actual
Yeah.
lock?
Yeah. So this week, this lock is locked tight, and I've got the Lions at -3 going into Arizona.
Mm,
Lions coming off of a tough loss at home against a team that I think they feel like they're a better team. Dan Campbell, was pretty emotional after the game, basically talking about how he felt like he kind of cost them the game with some, bad coaching mistakes. Their offensive line didn't play very well. I think Detroit's got a lot of really good players, and I think they're going to come back, and I think they're going to have a great week this week. And I think 3 points is just not going to be enough for the Cardinals, who, while Kyler looks good, Marvin Harrison looked great in week 2 and the limited action they gave him, and they're still not targeting him enough. But
Yeah.
I just think Detroit is, they're one of those teams that I think we're pretty disappointed with their week 2 result and feel like they need to come out and play a lot cleaner football, and I think they will.
Yeah, I don't dislike that. I looked at that one and kind of considered it briefly. I think for me, I think the Lions are one of those teams getting, similar to the Packers. I mean, two NFC teams just getting a lot of hype for a little bit of stuff. I think the Lions had a nice run last year at the end, which I think was, very impressive. But yeah, one of those teams you just haven't seen it, and again, maybe you need one of those teams that's up and coming and they prove it multiple years in a row. I mean, obviously the Chiefs had to start their dynasty somewhere.
Yeah.
We can keep saying Baltimore, 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 but it's like, but they don't do anything later, or Dallas, 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 not do anything. So, maybe they'll be great. I think personally, this is just a big prove it week for them. I think after that kind of tough loss, I think this is a big game. I think if they win this and they win it convincingly, I like their trajectory moving forward. If they do happen to lose this one, I'd be hesitant to say that they're going to be going far in the playoffs. So I think it's a big game for them. Don't dislike it. I like the small spreads anytime, right? Someone's got to win. Typically at the end of the game, I guess there are ties, but typically someone's got to win, kick a field goal to win it. So yeah, if you can get that 3, I think that's a solid pick.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think it's a big game for Detroit. I think it's I don't believe in a must win in week 3 when you're 1-1, but even if you're 0-2, like I wouldn't say it's a must win, but
Yeah, not a must win, but it just feels like one. If they lose, they could run into some trouble. Like at a high likelihood, they win it.
yeah.
I'd say okay, nice. They prove they can bounce back. Tough loss, tough coaching, whatever you want to call it. Move along. I think it'd be a big win for them. Definitely think they can do it. But yeah, Arizona look good, so we'll see.
Yeah.
Could be a fun one. We'll see.
They need to do it because they need to get the good vibes back in the building.
No doubt. No doubt.
All right, let's tell us how you did. You
Yeah,
didn't fare a
Chiefs.
lot better.
No, not a whole lot better. Chiefs was 6.5, so we needed the full touchdown. 1 by 1 was it? So they still won. A little bit better than the flip side, to yours. So if we're comparing, mine's like a 8 out of 10, yours is like a 2 out of 10. But yeah, still when you're betting, the line is the line, spread is the spread, and loss is the loss. So yeah, did not cover on that. I think my take is, Chiefs are still the Chiefs. Still like them the same way I liked them after week 1, after last Super Bowl, after Super Bowl before that. Still think they are highly motivated to win. That could be one of Mahomes' worst games he's ever played in the regular season. To still pull that out, I think is great. Most people now are saying they feel great about Burrow and no more hand injury, all these things, all these positives for the Bengals. Mostly negative stuff coming from the Chiefs side. Just again, Mahomes' worst game. Kelsey,
Yeah.
did he play? Was he hanging out with, Taylor Swift? Don't know. And yet they still win. So I think those are the two things that I take away from it is, yeah, 6.5 on the Bengals, at least for the foreseeable future, is probably too much because the Bengals do have their number in the sense that they're going to play them tight. I still like the Chiefs to pull out these games, no matter how important regular season or playoffs. But they know how to play them. They got something going there, whether it's purely motivation or whether it's scheme wise. They clearly got something they can keep these games tight. So yeah, probably wouldn't take 6.5 full touchdown moving forward. But Chiefs are still the Chiefs, and yeah, that's gonna be tough to beat.
Yeah, they're just they remind me so much of the Patriots dynasty. Just, inevitable is what it feels like. Watching that football game, as bad as Mahomes was playing, it just felt like as you got to the end of that game, Mahomes is going to be in position to win that football game. And once again, he was. I mean, also shout out to the kickers this last week. I mean, guys banging in some 55 yarders like they're nothing. I mean, Harrison Butker's game winning field goal was right down the middle, and it was like 54, 55 yards. And I mean, that's as high pressure as it gets. You miss the kick, you just straight up lose.
Yeah.
It's a home game. The time's expiring on the kick, so you're done.
We were
Like,
just
it's win
watching the
or
Eagles
lose.
game last night. That extra point got backed up to what, 46 yards, 47
Yeah.
yards. I mean, obviously just shy of 50, but still, like, that's not a piece of cake. And yeah, that guy, I think he was 4 for 4 last night or 3 for 3. I mean, yeah, just kicker is definitely kicking it through.
Yeah, NFL kicking has gotten better. They are definitely way better than they were 5, 10 years ago when it felt like a 50-yarder was like, man, probably should punt this. And now it's like 50 yards, like, yeah, absolutely kick that.
We
I
talk about
mean,
like college 3-point line and stuff. Like, think about
yeah,
the extra points for how long. In recent time, it wasn't even a thing. It was like, why are we even
yeah,
watching this? But probably 15, 20, 30 years ago, it's like, yeah, this is reasonable. Anything can happen on a kick from here. It's,
yeah. I mean,
yeah,
week one, McCarthy almost ran Aubrey, the Cowboys kicker, out there for like a 71 yarder.
that's
Like, and
ridiculous.
apparently after the game said that he actually wanted to do it and he was talked out of it like by one of the other coaches. Um,
If you got the
it's just
wind, I would think
unbelievable
you
that
could
they
hit
can
it. Yeah,
even that just seems so far. I mean, at a time
right.
when, like, again, like it wasn't that long ago that a 50 yarder was like, you might make 50% of them at best. And now it's like, oh, I would be okay with a 70 yarder attempt. Like, that's unbelievable.
Absolutely crazy. But
All right, well, what's your
this week, I'm trying to get a real lock one in for real. I don't know how this one didn't pop up. I think I told you I jotted like 4 down that I thought were possible. And yeah, shocked we didn't end up with the same one either, actually. But Texans -2.5 over the Vikings.
mm,
Um, I like that a lot. I mean, we've already talked about Stroud early on and what he looks like and how he can do. I mean, I think the Bears defense is significantly better than the Vikings. So, you know, for Stroud to pull that out easily, do I think the Vikings offense is that much better than the Bears right now? Definitely some. Darnold's definitely playing really well, definitely better than expected. I mean, obviously expectations plays a big role into that, but yeah, he's played really well. The offenses definitely look better than the Bears, but similar to mentioning the Saints last week against Dallas, Vikings feel like a team like that. You know, with Darnold there, I find it really hard to believe that they'll just keep up nice success moving along, no issues, no problems. I think they'll clearly have some hiccups, even if they do well, even if Darnold, kind of proved himself as, hey, I could be a starter in the league. I think they'll still have some games, some issues that come into it. I think Texans are great. I think Stroud's great. Yeah, and I think the Vikings are good win against 49ers again, not taking anything away from that, but I'm not going to bank too much onto it either that, they're some incredibly solid team going to be moving forward. So 2.5 field goal, even if it's tight, even if it's close at the end, like I said, I kind of anticipate these kick a field goal win them. Although I feel like there was multiple 1-point victories this week, which is always odd to
yeah.
me how that happens. But either way, 2.5, lock it in, minimum winning by a field goal. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I like that. I like that bet a lot too. I think that it's a prove it game for the Vikings. So, if they pull that win out, then I think that the Vikings are a much better football team than anyone thinks or realizes because they would have just, obviously they put a beat down on the Giants in week one. Most teams are going to do that. But then to go in and beat San Francisco, and if you beat the Houston Texans the very next week after they beat Chicago, I think that's a pretty big, 2-week resume for the Vikings. And now you got to start talking about the Vikings for, you know, are they a pretty good, like a deep playoff contender type team just because their coach is good and they've got a good supporting cast. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't think the Vikings are those things. I don't think they are. I personally don't think they're going to make the playoffs. I think they got a great start, but I think things are going to eventually, bear out and they're not going to be good enough. So yeah, I like that bet quite a bit.
Yeah, we'll see. We need some dubs. We got to prove that our locks are true locks, that they mean something. So let's get a couple W's this week.
Yeah, no more broken locks. No more broken locks.
True
All
that.
right, well, let's we'll wrap this up for episode number 2 here. So thanks for watching, thanks for listening. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Thanks for joining.